Imagine a company that starts as just a tiny speck, barely a blip on the radar. We're talking maybe 30 employees, pulling in something like $5 million in annual revenue, working out of a pretty small office.
Okay.
Now, picture that same company just 10 years later. It's completely transformed into this sprawling global empire. It's got over 15,000 employees all over the world and nearly $8 billion flowing through its systems every single year.
Wow, that's quite the jump.
It's not just growth, right? It's like a total metamorphosis, a fundamental reengineering. So
Mm.
for our deep dive today, the big question we're really trying to unpack is this. Who was the architect behind that incredible transformation at eBay? And maybe even more fascinating, how on earth did they pull it off?
Well, that seismic shift, that absolutely breathtaking scale up, it was largely orchestrated by one of the most influential, though sometimes I think often understated business leaders of the modern digital age, Meg Whitman.
Right, Meg Whitman.
Yeah. And when she first walked into eBay's incredibly humble San Jose office back in March of '98, what
Mm-hmm.
she found was, well, frankly, it was a fledgling enterprise. It was kind of teetering on the edge of chaos.
Chaos.
It
Okay.
was quirky, definitely full of raw energy, but despite that rapid growth everyone saw, it was far from being truly profitable. It was basically 30, maybe 30-something passionate staff members running this online auction site that, yeah, it was popular, but is only pulling in around $4.7 million a year in revenue.
Just incredible numbers, but small compared to what came next.
Exactly. Now, fast forward 10 years to 2008, when Meg Whitman eventually stepped down as CEO, that humble little auction site. It had absolutely blossomed into a global powerhouse, just like you said. Over 15,000 employees, nearly $8 billion in annual revenue.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of that growth, and importantly, the deliberate nature of it. It's truly astounding when you dig into it.
And that's precisely why we're here, for you, our listener. Because this isn't just a story about mind-boggling numbers, right? Or, impressive balance sheets. This deep dive is really about the how. It's about the leadership playbook, the practical, maybe even repeatable strategies of someone who didn't just grow a startup, but fundamentally engineered it. Engineered it into a scalable, sustainable, and, well, enduring machine. We'll get into how she turned this audacious vision into just meticulous execution day after day, how she navigated these bold, really game-changing acquisitions like PayPal and, yeah, even Skype.
Even Skype, which is a whole other story maybe.
Right. And crucially, we'll try to uncover how she managed to do all of this without sort of ripping the heart out of eBay, without losing that original, quirky, community-driven soul that made it special in the first place.
That's the trick, isn't it? Scaling without losing the magic.
Exactly. So this isn't just another corporate case study to, file away somewhere. Think of this as a playbook, a timeless roadmap, really, filled with practical insights for anyone, anywhere, who's trying to build something bigger than themselves, something that truly lasts. Maybe you're trying to grow a small team, or launch a new initiative, or maybe even just scale a passion project. I think the lessons here are remarkably universal.
Okay, so let's unpack this transformation. Let's start right at the beginning, that moment in March 1998 when Meg Whitman steps into eBay. You called it a brilliant mess, and I think that's just a perfect description.
It really was.
It had this incredible energy, right? This
Yeah.
passionate user base just exploding. But internally, it sounded like it was, I don't know, teetering on the edge of collapse.
Can you paint an even more vivid picture for us? Just how chaotic was it inside eBay back then?
Oh, it's a classic Silicon Valley paradox, truly. From the outside, like you said, eBay was exploding. They were seeing monthly growth rates that in some quarters were shooting up to like 70%. Imagine trying to manage that kind of demand for anything you're building.
Unbelievable.
But the inside story, that was a completely different beast. With only 30 employees trying desperately to keep pace with that kind of hypergrowth, the cracks weren't just forming, they were becoming these massive chasms. I mean, think about it. There was no formal human resources department.
No HR. With that growth.
None. Imagine trying to hire, say, 20 new people a month with absolutely no onboarding process, no clear payroll system, not even anyone officially designated to manage conflicts or performance issues. It was ad hoc, to put it mildly.
Wow.
And then there was no dedicated legal team. For an online marketplace dealing with potentially millions of transactions, disputes between strangers, liability issues, that was basically a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, you'd think that'd be priority number one.
You would think. And almost unbelievably, there wasn't even a proper finance department to track the literal millions of dollars starting to flow through the system. It was a company fueled entirely by raw enthusiasm and this incredible user demand, but it was completely lacking the basic foundational infrastructure. The organs and skeleton, the things you need to sustain that kind of explosive, uncontrolled growth.
So it was like a rocket ship without a guidance system.
Pretty much. A beautiful idea, a rocket ship, definitely. But without the operational muscle, the basic structure, to survive past its infancy, it was going to burn out fast.
So into this maelstrom of passionate chaos steps Meg Whitman. And her background was decidedly not what you'd expect from a Silicon Valley CEO back then, was it?
No, not at all.
She wasn't the 20-something coder in a hoodie. She wasn't a college dropout with just a big idea. She came from a completely different world, really.
Precisely. Her profile was incredibly non-typical for the Valley, especially in the late 90s. She wasn't an engineer, she wasn't a product designer, and she certainly wasn't a founder in that traditional, almost mythical sense. Meg Whitman brought something to Silicon Valley that, honestly, at the time, was in pretty short supply amidst all the move fast and break things kind of frenzy.
Which was?
Disciplined, strategic thinking. The kind honed over years in established, large, complex corporations. She had an MBA from Harvard, right?
Right.
And she'd racked up extensive experience at giants like Procter & Gamble, Bain & Company, Disney.
Hasbro. Big names, traditional companies.
Exactly. Her expertise wasn't in writing elegant code or dreaming up the next viral app. It was in building, scaling, and professionalizing companies. She understood organizational design, operational efficiency, financial controls, and crucially, the long game of building a sustainable business. And that's exactly what she immediately set out to implement at eBay.
So her famous first 100 days, they weren't about launching flashy new features or chasing even more users, which is probably what many people would assume for a hypergrowth tech startup like that.
Nope, not at all.
It was about something far less glamorous, wasn't it? But ultimately, maybe far more critical.
Absolutely. Her immediate focus was on what she famously called building the spine of the business. She recognized, with incredible foresight really, that without that fundamental infrastructure, the rapid growth would simply overwhelm the company. It would lead to burnout, chaos, and eventual collapse.
So building the spine, what did that actually look like, her first hires?
Well, her strategic hires weren't more product managers or marketing gurus, which again might have been the obvious move. Instead, she brought in seasoned senior leadership, people pulled directly from traditional Fortune 500 companies, experienced legal counsel, seasoned HR heads who knew how to build departments from scratch, veteran finance executives who understood controls and reporting.
That sounds almost radical for a Valley startup then. Weren't people worried she'd slow things down, introduce bureaucracy?
That was definitely a concern, voiced by some, sure. The fear that bringing in suits would kill the startup vibe. But Whitman was very clear about her intention. She explicitly hired these individuals not to slow eBay down, but actually to prevent it from burning out, to provide the stability and the scalable systems needed to support that explosive growth sustainably. These were people who understood how to professionalize operations, build robust processes, create predictable stability. Things that were desperately needed. They essentially took the operational chaos off the plates of the original engineers and product folks, freeing them up to focus on what they did best, innovation and the user experience.
That's fascinating, because it sounds like she was professionalizing it, making it more corporate in a sense, but somehow without actually destroying what made eBay special in the first place. That feels like a really nuanced, delicate line to walk, doesn't it?
It's incredibly difficult, yeah.
She didn't just come in and bulldoze the existing culture or try to force it into some standard corporate mold.
No, not at all. And this is where her approach truly stood out, I think, and offers such a profound lesson for any leader trying to scale something unique. She didn't arrive with the intention of transforming eBay into some generic traditional corporation, like turning it into, I don't know, P&G online.
Right.
In fact, she did the opposite. She seemed to genuinely deeply respect what made eBay unique, that vibrant, kind of quirky community, the inherent trust that somehow blossomed between strangers conducting transactions, the almost magical ability for people to sell literally anything from rare collectibles to broken toasters across vast distances.
That garage sale magic.
Exactly. She understood that this distinct identity, this almost grassroots communal spirit, that was eBay's superpower. So instead of trying to change that fundamental character or force it into a predetermined corporate box, She chose to protect it. She nurtured that unique spirit, that community-driven DNA, while at the same time carefully wrapping it in the necessary operational muscle. The strong, scalable systems that could handle the immense volume and complexity that was rapidly building up. It was about enabling, not dictating. About fortifying the existing magic, not trying to replace it with something else.
And this core belief system, this idea that companies really need robust infrastructure to support great ideas at scale, that really showed up in her decisions, didn't it? You mentioned before how she famously resisted all that external pressure to change eBay's look and feel, which at the time was famously, well, maybe a bit clunky and busy looking.
Oh, absolutely. Clunky is a good word for it.
What was the thinking behind sticking with that, especially when so many people must have been urging her to give it a more modern, sleek makeover?
Indeed. And this is such a classic example of her profound wisdom and, frankly, her humility as a leader. In the early 2000s, you have to remember, eBay's website looked absolutely nothing like its more polished minimalist competitors, think Amazon or Yahoo at the time.
Very different vibe.
Totally different. eBay was visually busy, a bit chaotic maybe, definitely colorful, quite crowded. It really did look like a digital garage sale or a community bulletin board. And yes, many investors, design consultants, even some voices inside the company were strongly urging her to give it a sleek, modern, more corporate overhaul, make it look more professional.
But she held firm.
She famously and apparently quite stubbornly resisted.
Wow.
Why? Because she understood something crucial. While it might not have been aesthetically perfect by traditional design standards, it worked for its users. More importantly, it felt like home to them. That slightly clunky, somewhat amateurish, definitely user-generated feel. That was part of its charm, part of its distinct identity that the community had grown to love and, importantly, trust.
The trust factor again.
Exactly. She knew instinctively, or maybe through deep listening, that changing that fundamental look and feel too drastically would risk alienating the very people who had built the platform from the ground up, the millions of buyers and sellers who saw eBay not just as some transactional website, but as their marketplace, their community. This wasn't just gut feeling, it was a profound understanding of network effects and user psychology. She recognized that the platform's real value came from its users' deep connection to it, and that connection was intimately tied to its unique, maybe even imperfect identity. Changing it wasn't worth the risk.
That's a truly remarkable level of self-awareness, isn't it? And real user empathy, especially for a CEO under what must have been immense pressure to conform to the prevailing Silicon Valley aesthetic norms of the time. It's pretty rare to see a leader effectively say, look, this isn't perfect by your standards, but it's right for our people. What does that tell us about the power of really deep user empathy, even when maybe the spreadsheets or the design gurus are pointing in a different direction?
It tells us that true, sustainable leadership isn't just about maximizing short-term metrics or following the latest trends. It's about deeply understanding the core essence of your product or your service and its intricate relationship with your users. This kind of thinking, respecting the soul, the existing spirit, while diligently installing the robust skeleton of a professional organization, it requires this unique blend of humility and profound wisdom.
Humility and wisdom, yeah.
It's basically an admission that, as the leader, you don't always know best. That sometimes the users, the community itself, hold the truest insights into what makes your product special and valuable. She understood that if you don't build that strong structure around that special core, it simply won't survive the inevitable pressures of scale. That's why her approach was so powerful and, I think, so effective. It wasn't about imposing a brand new vision from the top down. It was about fortifying an existing one, preserving the magic while building the machine capable of carrying it forward.
Which brings us right back to her own words, which just perfectly encapsulate this whole foundational mindset. She said, you have to protect the soul of what made a company great while building muscle to make it last. And that's not just some abstract corporate mantra for a PowerPoint slide, is it?
No, not at all. It's a real practical guiding principle for anyone building anything substantial. That mindset, that dual focus, is what transformed eBay from this wild, almost chaotic experiment into a meticulously engineered machine, a scalable, global, and sustainable business capable of handling millions of users, thousands of employees, and billions upon billions of dollars in transactions, all without losing its unique, community-driven identity.
And like you said, this isn't just a lesson for tech CEOs or folks operating in the digital world.
Absolutely not. It's a timeless lesson for anyone building something real, whether that's a small business you're trying to grow, a community initiative you're launching, or even just a personal passion project that you hope to scale someday. Because vision, no matter how grand or innovative it might be, without that underlying structure, without that discipline, It often just remains a dream, doesn't it?
It evaporates.
Exactly. But vision, when it's paired with meticulous discipline, with that deep, sometimes unglamorous attention to building the foundational spine, that's not just an evolution. That can be a revolution. That's how you take an idea and turn it into something that can truly change the world and endure for decades.
Okay, so she had this incredibly strong foundation in place, this spine, as she called it, built with real discipline and an almost counterintuitive kind of patience for a tech company back then. But a great foundation by itself, well, it doesn't build an $8 billion empire, does it?
No, it's necessary but not sufficient.
Right. The real magic, for me at least, comes next. How she then managed to unleash truly exponential growth. We're talking about multiplying revenue from, what, $4.7 million to nearly $8 billion in just a decade. That's staggering. What were those pivotal moves, those key decisions that turned a now stable startup into an $8 billion global machine?
You're absolutely right. That kind of scale isn't accidental. It's the result of a series of deeply calculated bets, each one strategically building on the last, almost designed for a compounding effect. The first critical move, interestingly, came incredibly early in her tenure, eBay's IPO. It happened just 6 months after Whitman took the helm.
6 months? That's incredibly fast. Aggressive.
It was fast, undeniably aggressive for a company of its size and, frankly, its maturity at the time, especially when you consider many startups then were still trying to figure out their basic business models, let alone go public. But, and this is key, it wasn't reckless. Whitman possessed this fundamental understanding of market dynamics, particularly in that nascent frothy .com era. Momentum matters.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything. Going public early, in her view, meant securing crucial capital before that window of opportunity potentially slammed shut, which, as we know, it very quickly did for many, many other companies just a couple of years later.
Right, the crash was coming.
Exactly. The IPO also signaled immediate legitimacy to a rapidly growing user base, and, just as importantly, to crucial financial partners and potential international partners. And most importantly, it provided eBay with the necessary fuel, that enormous capital infusion, to really build out Whitman's grander vision, which wasn't just about being an online auction site, but about creating a truly global marketplace. She saw it almost as a strategic sprint to capture that capital and market position before the market inevitably matured or, well, collapsed.
Okay, so securing the capital, getting that fuel, was the crucial first step. But money alone doesn't build an empire that large. What came next sounds like a fundamental shift, transforming eBay from just being a product, this quirky online option site, into a comprehensive platform that could truly scale globally. How did she actually achieve that transformation?
Yeah, that platform thinking was critical. She executed this transformation in, I'd say, 3 distinct yet very interconnected ways. Each one was designed to multiply eBay's reach and its utility for users. First was through aggressive, yet highly nuanced, international expansion.
Going global.
Going global, but doing it smartly. Under Whitman's leadership, eBay didn't just, translate its website into a few different languages and call it a day. They strategically entered over 25 new markets, spanning continents, establishing significant footholds in places like Germany, the UK, South Korea, Australia.
Right.
Really major economies.
But the key was how they did it, right? The localization.
Precisely. What was absolutely critical here was her localization approach. Instead of imposing a rigid one-size-fits-all model dictated from Silicon Valley, which was, frankly, the common approach then, she empowered local teams on the ground. This meant giving them the autonomy to adapt the platform, tweak its messaging, and even adjust certain policies to deeply resonate with local cultural norms and specific market preferences.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. For instance, in South Korea, where there was a much stronger cultural preference for real name verification online as a way to build trust, eBay adapted its system to accommodate that.
Right.
Or in Germany, where fixed-price sales were often more common than auctions for certain types of goods, they leaned much more heavily into the Buy It Now feature earlier and more prominently than maybe they did in the U.S. initially. This seemingly slower, more nuanced strategy compared to just a rapid, unthinking global rollout actually ensured much deeper market penetration, genuine cultural fit, and ultimately significantly higher long-term user adoption and retention in those key markets. It wasn't just about planting flags, it was about cultivating gardens.
That focus on localization seems incredibly smart, especially for a platform that's fundamentally built on community and trust, as we discussed. So what was the second key aspect of transforming eBay into that true platform?
The second pillar was unlocking a whole new level of user convenience. And this might sound almost deceptively simple today, but its impact at the time was absolutely revolutionary.
Mm.
The introduction of the Buy It Now button.
Ah, buy it now. It's hard to imagine eBay without it now.
Exactly. It's ubiquitous across e-commerce today, isn't it?
Hmm.
But back in the early 2000s, eBay was still almost exclusively an auction house. It was a place where you bid, you waited, you hoped you won. This single feature fundamentally changed eBay's identity. It transformed it almost overnight into a hybrid e-commerce engine.
How so?
Well, it immediately appealed to a completely different segment of buyers, those people who valued speed and immediate gratification over the potential bargain or the thrill of a bidding war. Instead of waiting days, sometimes even a week, for an auction to close, a user could simply click and purchase right then and there. This dramatically expanded eBay's potential user base and its overall utility. Industry estimates at the time suggested that Buy It Now alone added hundreds of millions of dollars in incremental revenue each year. It wasn't just a new feature, it was a strategic pivot that significantly broadened eBay's appeal and diversified its revenue streams, moving it decisively beyond just being a niche online auction site.
Okay, so international localization, buy it now convenience. And then came what many people consider her absolute masterstroke, the move that really cemented eBay's dominance, the acquisition of PayPal. That was a huge gamble at the time, wasn't it? $1.5 billion in 2002, especially since there were other payment processors out there. What made PayPal the masterstroke?
It was indeed a very bold move, absolutely. And it was viewed with significant skepticism by quite a few people on Wall Street at the time, particularly given PayPal's own rather tumultuous early history of the PayPal mafia and all that.
Right.
But Whitman saw the undeniable strategic necessity. By 2002, PayPal wasn't just a payment method on eBay. It was already the most popular payment method by a significant margin, processing a vast number of transactions between buyers and sellers. But critically, as you alluded to, eBay didn't own it.
That's the vulnerability.
Exactly. This created two massive vulnerabilities for eBay. First, they had absolutely no control over what was essentially a mission-critical function for their users' payment processing. That directly impacted transaction completion rates, user satisfaction, and fundamentally, trust. Second, by not owning the payment layer, eBay was leaving a vast amount of incredibly valuable user data insights into purchasing behavior, financial flows, and potential profit completely on the table. Whitman, with what turned out to be incredible foresight and a really keen understanding of platform economics, pushed to acquire PayPal for that $1.5 billion. And in hindsight, yeah, it was an undeniable masterstroke.
Why? What did it unlock beyond just owning the payment process?
Well, this acquisition didn't just give eBay its own payment infrastructure, which was huge in itself. More importantly, it solidified customer trust, which, as we keep saying, was eBay's absolute bedrock. Suddenly, transactions became infinitely smoother. Fraud was significantly reduced almost overnight because of PayPal's existing security measures and buyer-seller protection policies. Sellers started receiving their payments much faster, which improved their cash flow and loyalty. And buyers felt a profound sense of security knowing that a trusted, dedicated third party was handling their sensitive financial information.
It removed a huge friction point.
A massive friction point. And it wasn't just operational value, it was profound psychological scale. It removed anxiety, it built confidence, and it made eBay a far more reliable and attractive place to conduct serious business, not just casual auctions. By 2005, just a few years later, PayPal was handling over 70% of all transactions on eBay. It had become not just a convenient feature, but a powerful, self-sustaining financial engine in its own right, spinning off significant profits and generating data that further fueled eBay's growth and strategic decisions. It was integrated synergy at its best.
That's a perfect example of a strategic acquisition that just locks in a core function and creates a flywheel effect. But she also made another really big bet, another major acquisition that didn't quite pan out in the same spectacular way, did she? Skype.
Ah, yes, Skype.
What was the rationale there? $2.6 billion in 2005 seems like a lot for something that wasn't directly commerce related. And what can we maybe learn from it, even if it didn't ultimately succeed as planned?
Yes. The Skype acquisition in 2005 for that substantial $2.6 billion was definitely another bold move, albeit one with a very different outcome. The strategic intention behind it was actually quite interesting. The idea was to integrate voice communication, specifically the then-nascent video calling capabilities of Skype, directly into the eBay marketplace experience.
To let buyers and sellers talk.
Exactly. Whitman envisioned a world where buyers and sellers could connect more directly, more personally, perhaps negotiating prices in real time. maybe visually inspecting high-value items over video, or even offering post-sale support more effectively. It was fundamentally about deepening the connection and the trust between users, extending that human element of eBay even further into the digital realm.
Okay, I can see the vision there. And it didn't quite work out.
No, it didn't. While the acquisition was bold, it ultimately didn't pan out as hoped. Integrating Skype meaningfully into eBay's core commerce flow proved technically and culturally challenging, and the user adoption for that specific use case just wasn't there at the time. Skype was eventually spun off years later. However, even though it wasn't a home run like PayPal, the Skype acquisition showcased a really vital aspect of Whitman's leadership philosophy. Her willingness to explore adjacent innovations, to take calculated risks and make forward-looking bets, even if the short-term ROI wasn't immediately guaranteed.
So it showed ambition even if it didn't pay off directly.
Precisely. It underlined her understanding that sustained long-term growth often requires exploring new frontiers, pushing boundaries, and being open to experimentation, even knowing that some experiments, maybe even extensive ones, won't yield the desired results. The lesson here, perhaps, is that even when a specific strategy doesn't land perfectly, the underlying willingness to innovate and adapt, to look beyond the immediate core business, is absolutely crucial for staying relevant and achieving long-term growth in a rapidly changing landscape.
Okay, so when you look at all these pieces together, that rapid IPO for capital, the aggressive but carefully localized international push, the game-changing buy it now button, and then these massive, bold acquisitions like PayPal and even the up with Skype, it really paints a picture of incredible strategic depth, doesn't it? This wasn't just, throwing things at the wall to see what stuck.
It absolutely does. Whitman's growth strategy was never just about getting bigger in terms of raw numbers. It was always about achieving scalability with genuine depth and strategic leverage. She expanded horizontally by methodically opening up new international markets, ensuring local fit and deep sustainable penetration. She expanded vertically by integrating critical payment infrastructure with PayPal, locking in user trust and a vital revenue stream. And she expanded functionally by introducing features like Buy It Now that dramatically increase user engagement and broaden eBay's overall appeal beyond just auctions.
And the result?
The result was that by the time she departed in 2008, eBay wasn't just facilitating transactions. It was enabling a staggering $60 billion in gross merchandise volume annually. It wasn't merely an online auction site anymore. It had been meticulously transformed into a true global commerce infrastructure, built upon that bedrock of trust, powered by efficient transactions and increasingly leveraging cutting-edge technology. This monumental achievement truly embodied her core philosophy on growth, which she articulated as, if you want to grow big, build systems that grow without you. It's all about creating those self-sustaining engines, not just adding more components that require constant manual tending and intervention from the top.
Now let's shift gears slightly. Managing a company's growth from, 30 people huddled in a small office to this massive global enterprise of over 15,000 employees spread across dozens of countries. That's just an immense leadership challenge in itself. It feels like a point where most organizations could easily collapse under their own weight, or at the very least lose their core direction, lose that culture we talked about. Yet eBay under Whitman not only survived that explosive growth, but actually thrived. What was her secret sauce? How did she manage to orchestrate such a vast, complex team without losing control or descending into total chaos?
That's a critical question, isn't it? And it really speaks to a core insight of hers that I think many founders and CEOs, especially in those super high growth environments, often miss.
Yeah.
You don't actually scale effectively by trying to manage more things yourself. You scale by managing less, but doing it much, much better.
Manage less, but better. Okay, how does that work in practice?
Well, her leadership style wasn't about micromanaging every single department or keeping tabs on every individual contributor. That's impossible at scale, right? Instead, it was fundamentally about creating incredibly clear operational lanes for her teams, cultivating a remarkably strong and shared organizational culture, and embedding these robust systems of trust throughout the entire company, top to bottom. She understood, maybe intuitively or from her corporate experience, that a leader's primary role at scale shifts dramatically. It moves away from direct, hands-on control and towards ensuring powerful coordination and alignment across literally thousands of independent decision-makers spread all over the world. It's really about building an organization that can essentially manage itself, guided by clear guardrails and a deeply shared sense of purpose.
That sounds great in theory, but maybe a bit counterintuitive for some leaders who feel they need to be in control. managing less. How did she actually implement that in terms of specific day-to-day leadership habits? What did that actually look like for her and her executive team?
Okay, let's break it down into maybe 4 key habits that really stand out. First, and perhaps most strategically important, she built a truly formidable leadership team before she really needed to build the company out to its full scale.
Hiring ahead of the curve.
Exactly. Her initial major hires, as we touched on earlier, were not simply tech rock stars or brilliant product visionaries, although obviously talent was a huge factor.
Mm.
But her priority was hiring people she called builders of organizations. These were those seasoned senior executives drawn from established large-scale corporations like P&G, Disney, Bain, individuals who had direct, hands-on prior experience navigating and, crucially, scaling complex organizations.
People had seen that movie before.
Precisely. Imagine bringing someone in who has managed complex global supply chains for a major brand into a chaotic startup environment. They just see problems and potential solutions through a completely different lens. She wasn't just bringing in raw talent. She was strategically importing expertise in organizational architecture, in building the very systems and processes that would be needed to manage the eventual massive scale. And then, and this is absolutely crucial, she didn't turn around and micromanage them. She empowered them. She let them lead their functions.
She trusted them.
She trusted them implicitly. She famously stated something along the lines of, if you hire the right people and give them the room to run, magic happens. This deliberate delegation of authority, built on deep trust in their proven experience, was what freed Whitman herself up. It allowed her to focus on the overarching vision, on maintaining that critical culture, and on making those really high-stakes strategic decisions like the PayPal acquisition that only a CEO could or should make. She wasn't just hiring for today's problems. She was consciously hiring for tomorrow's scale.
Okay, so she hired great people and trusted them to build out their departments. That makes sense. But a large organization still needs structure. It needs oversight, right? How does she manage to balance that necessary freedom with the required oversight without creating a soul-crushing bureaucratic nightmare, which is, let's face it, another really common pitfall for rapidly scaling companies?
Yeah, finding that balance is incredibly tricky. And that brings us neatly to her second key habit. She practiced and instilled rigorous operational clarity without succumbing to stifling bureaucracy. Whitman was known to be a staunch believer in metrics, in key performance indicators, KPIs, and in having clear, accessible dashboards tracking progress across the business. However, and this is the important nuance of her rationale for this intense focus on data, wasn't primarily to micromanage individuals or to create endless layers of reporting structure.
So what was the purpose of all those metrics then?
Her stated purpose was to make decision-making repeatable, consistent, and fundamentally data-driven across the entire sprawling organization. Every single division, every quarter, every major strategic initiative had explicitly defined goals and, importantly, measurable outcomes attached to it. But here's this crucial distinction in how she used them. Those metrics were reportedly never used as weapons for blame or punishment when things went off track.
Interesting, so not for pointing fingers.
Exactly. Instead, they were positioned and used as shared tools for alignment. They ensured that everyone, from an engineer in Germany to a marketer in Australia, understood the collective objective for that period and, critically, how their individual or team efforts directly contributed to achieving it. If a particular metric was off, the immediate question wasn't, okay, who failed here? But rather, what does this data tell us about where our system or our process might be breaking down, and how can we as a team fix it collaboratively? This approach fostered what you might call a rare sense of freedom within a framework. It allowed teams the autonomy to move with agility, to experiment, even to fail sometimes, as long as they remained fundamentally aligned with the company's broader strategic rhythm and goals.
Okay, so clarity through data, but used for alignment, not control. That's subtle but powerful. It also sounds like she was very structured, almost systematic in her operational approach, but somehow she also managed to maintain a very human touch, which, again, at that kind of scale with 15,000 people globally, seems really, really difficult to do. How did she keep the culture feeling somewhat intimate or at least connected, even as the company got huge?
That's her third key leadership habit, and I think it speaks volumes about her emotional intelligence as a leader. Despite being this high-powered corporate executive leading a global tech giant, she seemed genuinely committed to making eBay feel like a much smaller, more connected organization than it actually was. She implemented several practical, highly impactful habits that were specifically designed to fight that natural sense of disengagement and distance that inevitably creeps in with scale.
Like what kinds of things did she do?
Well, things like holding regular, maybe weekly, all-hands calls or meetings to keep everyone informed about key decisions and progress, helping them feel connected to the bigger picture. She was also known for just walking the halls, interacting casually with employees at all levels, making herself visible and approachable. And perhaps most notably, and maybe most surprisingly, she made it a point to personally sit down with the customer service team on a regular basis.
Sit with customer service. Seriously.
Seriously. And apparently, this wasn't just a quick photo op or a PR stunt. She would actually put on a headset and take calls directly from eBay users, listening firsthand to their complaints, their frustrations, their suggestions. You can almost picture her, the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company, patiently listening to a seller upset about a shipping label issue, or hearing a buyer's sheer enthusiasm for finding some rare collectible.
Wow. That's commitment.
It is. And her belief behind it was apparently quite simple, yet profound. You can't lead a company you don't listen to. This wasn't just some feel-good gesture. It was a deeply strategic decision. She was actively fighting against that natural leadership drift, that insulation that occurs as layers get added between the top executives and the frontline employees and customers. By doing this, she ensured she remained deeply connected to the actual pulse of the company and its users, allowing their real-world voices and experiences to directly inform her perspective and strategic decisions.
That's incredible. Direct pipeline from the user to the CEO. Okay, so she hired great people, gave them clarity, stayed humanly connected. What about the overarching values? Beyond the systems and the personal touch, how did she ensure that everyone, from San Jose to Berlin to Sydney, was truly rowing in the same direction, feeling connected to the core mission of eBay?
That leads directly to her fourth key habit. She leaned very heavily on shared values, not just relying on shared systems or processes. eBay's internal motto, its core purpose, was beautifully simple and powerful. We exist to empower people.
Empower people.
Yeah. And crucially, this wasn't just some empty marketing slogan plastered on the walls. It was a philosophy that was deeply embedded and actively reinforced throughout the company. It was integrated into the hiring process they looked for people who resonated with that mission. It was part of the onboarding for new employees. It even factored into performance reviews. The idea was that whether an employee was managing logistics in a warehouse in Berlin, writing code in San Jose, or handling customer support calls from Bangalore, they understood this core mission. More importantly, they could clearly see how their specific role, their daily work, contributed directly to that larger purpose of empowering individuals, empowering them to connect, to transact, to turn their passions into profit, to become entrepreneurs on the platform.
So it gave meaning beyond just the task at hand.
Exactly. This provided a powerful sense of shared purpose that allowed for tremendous local autonomy in how the work got done in different regions or functions, but maintained a strong global alignment on why they were all doing it in the first place. That's how you truly scale culture effectively across borders and functions. Not through imposing rigid uniform rules or endlessly repeating slogans, but by providing people with a profound sense of meaning and a clear connection to something larger than themselves, something they can believe in.
That makes a lot of sense.
So putting it all together, by the time Meg Whitman stepped down in 2008, she had successfully navigated eBay through this unprecedented period of absolutely explosive hypergrowth. But crucially, she did it without succumbing to hyperchaos. Her leadership wasn't about exerting tight, centralized control over every single detail. It was really about brilliant coordination, purposeful delegation, and fostering that shared sense of mission. It really lives up to that powerful analogy she often used. When you have 15,000 people all rowing passionately in the same direction, you don't necessarily need to be grabbing the tiller and steering the boat at every single moment. Your primary job as the leader shifts to ensuring that the boat itself, the structure, the culture, the systems, doesn't break under the immense collective power and momentum. She built a system that could largely self-correct and self-direct, all operating within a very clear, shared framework.
You know, it's such a common story, almost an inevitable pitfall for so many startups, isn't it? They get big, they achieve success, they bring in the necessary systems, the processes, the corporate structure, and then somewhere along that journey, they just seem to lose their soul.
Happens all the time.
They end up trading that vibrant, unique culture and the passionate community that made them special in the first place for, I don't know, cold efficiency and pure scale. But Meg Whitman, it seems, took a distinctly different and probably much more challenging path with eBay, didn't she? It feels like a path of conscious, deliberate preservation.
She absolutely did. And this, I think, is perhaps one of the most enduring and widely applicable lessons from her entire tenure at eBay. Whitman seemed to operate from this firm belief that culture is not what you write on the wall, it's what you actively protect when things get big. And for eBay, above all else, that meant fiercely, almost religiously, protecting the concept of trust. It was the invisible glue holding the entire marketplace together. You could almost say it was the fundamental operating system for the whole platform.
Trust. That's such a powerful word, isn't it? Especially for an online platform back then, where people were routinely interacting with complete strangers, often across vast distances, buying and selling literally everything imaginable. What did that trust truly mean for eBay in practice, beyond just, say, basic payment security?
Well, eBay was never just a purely transactional website, was it? At its core, it was always conceived and nurtured as a thriving community, built fundamentally on human connection, however virtual. At its very heart, it wasn't merely about the cold mechanics of buying or selling an item. It was about forging these sometimes unlikely connections between individuals. People were regularly selling, their grandmother's used camera, a collection of rare coins they'd curated for years, beloved old comic books from their childhood, even seemingly worthless broken printers for parts.
Right, the weird stuff, too.
Absolutely. And all of these items were being exchanged with complete strangers, sometimes living on the other side of the world. The entire ecosystem was held together, sometimes rather precariously it felt, by this intricate, constantly evolving web of mutual trust. It was reinforced primarily by those detailed feedback ratings and the public user profiles. Buyers had to trust that sellers would accurately describe the items and actually ship them. Sellers had to trust that buyers would genuinely pay up. And crucially, both parties had to trust that eBay, as the platform, the intermediary, would mediate disputes fairly and essentially have their backs if something inevitably went wrong.
That's a lot of faith required from everyone involved.
A huge amount. And that profound kind of trust, you see, it cannot be simply enforced by writing more lines of code or implementing ever more complex algorithms. It has to be meticulously earned, day by day, transaction by transaction, through the very fabric of the platform's culture and its policies. Whitman seemed to understand this implicitly, down to her core, and that's precisely why, even as eBay mushroomed into this multi-billion-dollar global machine, she vehemently refused to over-corporatize it, to sanitize it, to strip away that slightly messy human element.
So what were some of the tangible, maybe everyday ways she actively protected that unique trust-based culture and fought against that constant impulse to corporatize everything? You mentioned resisting the website redesign earlier, for instance.
Exactly, that was a big one. She clearly understood that a company's visual identity often subtly reflects its underlying values. So she insisted on keeping eBay's somewhat quirky, maybe even slightly dated-looking, colorful logo, resisting all that pressure for a more polished or corporate redesign, even when sophisticated outside consultants were pushing hard for it, probably arguing it looked amateurish or unprofessional.
Sticking to their roots visually.
Right. And she also consciously avoided flooding the homepage with intrusive banner ads or excessive commercial promotions, despite what must have been constant pressure to maximize short-term revenue. She understood that doing so would inevitably degrade the core user experience and erode that crucial sense of community ownership. Her mantra seemed to be consistently clear. We didn't want to be like Amazon. We wanted to be eBay. This wasn't just stubbornness. It felt like a strategic cultural defense mechanism, preserving the visual and experiential cues that signaled familiarity, authenticity, and community to its loyal user base. And beyond just the aesthetics, she also actively baked customer voices right into the core business model itself.
Okay, how did she manage that? Baking customer voices into the business model? That sounds really intensive, really hands-on, especially for a company growing as fast and as large as eBay was.
It was incredibly hands-on and incredibly smart, I think. She launched and heavily invested in these regular power seller conferences. Now, these weren't just token appreciation events or opportunities for canned corporate presentations. They were designed as vital interactive forums where eBay's most active and successful sellers, literally the lifeblood of the platform, could meet face-to-face with senior executives, with product managers, even directly with the engineers who were building the platform tools they used every day. Direct access. And crucially, as we touched on before, Whitman herself personally attended these events whenever possible, and not primarily as a keynote speaker delivering pronouncements from on high, but genuinely as a listener. She would reportedly sit for hours in sessions, just absorbing the complaints, hearing the feature suggestions, listening to the raw, unfiltered ideas and frustrations directly from the people who were living and breathing the eBay experience day in and day out. Imagine a power seller passionately detailing their frustrations with the complexity of international shipping label integration, or suggesting a much better way to manage multiple listings efficiently.
That's powerful feedback.
Incredibly powerful. And the most potent part is eBay frequently rolled out significant platform changes, entirely new features directly based on the feedback gathered at these sessions. It created this incredibly powerful ongoing feedback loop that kept the platform development deeply grounded in the reality of its users and highly responsive to the needs of its core community. It fundamentally meant that eBay was truly building for its users constantly, not just building at them based on internal assumptions.
That's a remarkable level of dedication to staying connected to the user base, especially at scale. So as eBay then expanded globally into all these different countries, how did she manage to scale these core values of trust and community responsiveness without simply imposing a uniform, maybe inappropriate Silicon Valley culture onto every new market? How do you actually scale something as intangible as trust internationally?
Yeah, that's another hallmark of her really nuanced leadership, and it holds a crucial lesson for any company considering global expansion. As eBay moved into vastly diverse markets like Germany, Korea, the UK, Australia, Whitman steadfastly resisted that common urge to simply export a rigid, standardized Silicon Valley culture or a completely one-size-fits-all product offering. Instead, she deliberately empowered the local leaders in each country with significant operational autonomy.
Let the local experts lead.
Exactly. These local teams had the freedom and the expectation to tweak the product features, adapt the marketing messaging, and even modify certain customer service policies to better align with the specific cultural norms and consumer expectations in their market. For example, we mentioned South Korea earlier, adapting to real name verification preferences to build local trust. Or in Germany, recognizing the preference for fixed price models and making buy it now much more dominant there, much faster than in the US, simply because it reflected local buying habits. But, and this is the crucial part, while the operational details and the specific tactics often differed significantly from country to country, the core underlying philosophy remained absolutely unshakable and consistent everywhere. Build a platform based fundamentally on trust. Empower individuals to become entrepreneurs, and never ever forget your ultimate power comes directly from your users. This strategy allowed for massive global scale without fatally diluting local relevance or compromising the fundamental principle of trust that underpinned the entire eBay ecosystem worldwide.
So it sounds like she truly let the community lead in many ways, rather than trying to dictate the direction to them. That really does feel like the opposite of how many tech companies operate today, where they often seem to be trying to shepherd users towards where they, the company, think they should go, regardless of user preference.
It is absolutely. A common misstep, or perhaps temptation for many tech companies, especially successful ones, is to try to dictate user behavior, to lead their users down a path they haven't necessarily asked to go down, often because the company genuinely believes it knows best or sees a new revenue opportunity. eBay, under Whitman's leadership, generally did the precise opposite. They were incredibly astute observers of emergent user behavior.
Watching what people were already doing.
Exactly. They watched carefully which product categories were growing organically purely through user demand. They paid close attention to how the most entrepreneurial sellers were creatively hacking the system, finding workarounds to create their own mini stores within the platform before official eBay stores features even existed, for example. And then, crucially, eBay didn't shut that down or ignore it. Instead, they built the official tools and the robust infrastructure needed to support and amplify those user-driven trends. They didn't dictate, here is the future of e-commerce. Instead, they essentially followed their community's evolving needs and amplified the organic growth that was already happening. That's how eBay transformed organically from being primarily a place for weekend auctions of collectibles into a powerful launchpad for full-time professional e-commerce businesses, turning countless hobbyists into genuine online entrepreneurs. It wasn't because the company declared a new strategy from on high. It was because they listened intently, adapted quickly, and then scaled with their community, nurturing what was already naturally bubbling up and giving it the strong support it needed to flourish.
So when you really bring all of this together, her focus on trust, resisting over-corporatization, baking in user feedback, empowering local teams, following user behavior, her deepest leadership philosophy wasn't some complex algorithm or a secret strategic sauce hidden in a vault. It really just boiled down to one simple yet profoundly powerful core belief, didn't it? A belief that resonated from the executive boardroom right down to those customer service calls she used to take.
Exactly. You won't find it articulated in elaborate, jargon-filled strategy decks or complex corporate mission statements. It was embedded, lived, and breathed in a singular, powerful conviction. Trust is our product. Everything else is just code. In an era where technology is so often, and sometimes fairly, accused of eroding privacy, fostering division, and breaking down trust, eBay, under Meg Whitman's stewardship, was meticulously, deliberately built on trust as its very bedrock. And as the company expanded dramatically across international borders, diversified its offerings into countless new categories, embraced dozens of new languages, and welcomed millions upon millions of new users from every corner of the globe, it somehow managed to never lose that essential soul, that core identity. Why? Because from her very first day to her very last, Meg Whitman never stopped actively guarding that fundamental principle, ensuring that trust, above all else, remained the true, enduring product of eBay.
You know, Meg Whitman truly stood out in the Silicon Valley landscape, didn't she? Especially back then, in a world that, particularly during that whole dot-com boom and bust cycle, seemed utterly obsessed with flashy founders and these almost mythical tech geniuses who all seemed to fit a very specific narrow mold.
The hoodie stereotype.
Exactly. Young, almost always male, often coders by background, wearing hoodies, maybe pitching their world-changing ideas from beanbag chairs. She just quietly broke every single one of those conventions. She wasn't a coder, she wasn't 26 years old, yet she built one of the most spectacularly successful and enduring internet businesses of the entire early 2000s, completely redefining what power and influence in the tech world could actually look like, often just by being herself.
Yeah. Her influence was indeed unique, and I think incredibly impactful precisely because it was often so unassuming, so lacking in flash. Firstly, and maybe most importantly for that era, she provided undeniable, tangible proof that consistent execution almost always beats ego and hype in the long run. During the height of the dot-com boom, so many tech leaders aspired to be these grand visionaries, focusing intensely on generating hype, courting media appearances, and chasing sky-high future valuations that, as we know, often evaporated practically overnight.
Right, vaporware companies.
Exactly. Whitman, on the other hand, seems singularly focused on tangible results, on meticulously building out that practical infrastructure we talked about, and simply on delivering quarter after quarter. She never seemed to try to be the public face or the celebrity CEO of eBay. She didn't actively chase the press spotlight, and she famously, almost religiously, avoided overpromising on future results. Instead, she just consistently overdelivered, letting the hard numbers speak for themselves. I mean, just consider again the incredible impact metrics achieved under her 10-year leadership, revenue exploding from $4.7 million to nearly $8 billion. The employee count skyrocketing from just 30 people to over 15,000 globally. eBay expanding its reach successfully into more than 25 countries, and the company facilitating a staggering $60 billion in merchandise sales annually by the time she left.
The numbers are just staggering.
They really are. She didn't need to dominate the headlines or become a media darling to absolutely dominate the online marketplace space. As a principle she seemed to live by, which you quoted earlier, people don't remember your ideas, they remember your impact. It was this quiet, relentless, almost understated focus on building something real, something sustainable, something that worked.
That's such a powerful statement, isn't it? People don't remember your ideas, they remember your impact. And she also seemed to demonstrate a really different kind of power, one that wasn't about necessarily being the loudest voice in the room or the most dominant personality. How did that different kind of power manifest itself in her leadership?
Precisely. I think she fundamentally showed that true lasting power often comes from influence, not sheer volume or dominance. Unlike some of her perhaps more visible male CEO counterparts at the time, who sometimes seemed to rule through overt dominance, maybe aggressive confrontation, or very public grandstanding, Whitman appeared to lead primarily through alignment and careful consensus building. She cultivated an environment where people, particularly her senior team, genuinely felt heard. And she seemed to have this uncanny ability to forge broad consensus on important decisions without ever fatally compromising on the critical strategic direction or diluting the necessary tough choices.
So consensus without compromise, that's a fine line.
It's a very fine line. Her leadership style was often characterized by observers as quietly powerful, never flashy or bombastic, but always firm in conviction, consistently steady under pressure, and ultimately deeply lasting in its effect. precisely because it commanded genuine respect, not just grudging compliance. And this quiet strength, this steady hand, was perhaps most profoundly evident in how she handled major crises.
Like the infamous dot-com crash, right, in the early 2000s. That must have been the ultimate stress test for her leadership style and the company she'd built. So many high-flying tech companies completely folded then, but eBay seemed to just sail right through it relatively unscathed. How did she navigate that period when absolute panic was gripping the entire industry?
Oh, it was the ultimate crucible, absolutely. And you're right, many companies, including some that seemed invincible just months before, simply vanished during that brutal period. During the dot-com crash of 2002, when countless startups folded and the NASDAQ stock market suffered a truly catastrophic collapse, eBay not only survived, but remarkably, it actually thrived, remaining consistently profitable throughout that entire tumultuous period.
What was the key?
The key was that Whitman, with her disciplined approach, had already meticulously built financial discipline and a truly sustainable business model right into the company's core before the crash even hit. She had never chased those hyperinflated valuations or unsustainable growth at all costs metrics that doomed so many others. Her focus, from day one, was always on fundamental, sustainable value creation and, crucially, profitability. So while other companies were desperately scrambling to slash costs, lay off huge chunks of their staff in panic mode, and pivot their entire business models overnight, eBay's existing robust infrastructure and its prudent financial management allowed it to weather the storm with relative stability. She didn't just survive. She actually leaned into eBay's unique strength as a trusted, community-driven marketplace during a period of widespread economic uncertainty and plummeting consumer confidence, and the company emerged from the crash arguably even stronger relative to its competitors. That level of disciplined control, maintained steadfastly under immense external pressure, that is influence in its purest and most effective form. She hadn't built a flimsy house of cards based on hype. She had patiently built a financial fortress.
She also had a really significant, if maybe understated, impact on what it meant to be a female CEO in the tech industry at that time. But notably, as you pointed out, she did it without ever really making her gender the central narrative. She just led.
That's such a crucial point, and one that I think often gets overlooked in the broader discussion of her overall legacy. Meg Whitman was one of only a very select few women leading a major high-profile tech company during that particular era. Yet she never seemed to use her gender as a platform or as a defining characteristic of her leadership style. She didn't seek special treatment or allowances, nor did she actively position herself as a symbol for female leadership. Her approach seemed incredibly simple and unyielding. She focused entirely on doing the work, and she simply did it, by almost any objective measure, better than most of her peers, male or female.
And that had its own power.
Absolutely. Her very subtlety in this regard had its own profound power. By consistently delivering truly exceptional results year after year, without fanfare and without making her gender the primary focus of the story, she effectively, quietly changed the entire conversation around women in tech leadership. It shifted almost imperceptibly from speculative, often patronizing questions like, well, can women really lead effectively in the rough-and-tumble tech world, to becoming an undeniable statement of fact. Of course they can. Just look at what Meg Whitman built. Look at the global empire she forged at eBay. Her mere presence, coupled with her undeniable success, redefined expectations simply by embodying excellence quietly. She helped normalize female leadership at the highest levels, not by demanding it, but simply by excelling at it.
And her influence didn't just stop when she stepped down from the CEO role at eBay in 2008, did it? She continued to shape the world and exert influence in entirely new and sometimes surprising ways, which is also quite unusual for a CEO stepping down from such a massive defining role.
Absolutely. That's another fascinating chapter. When she departed eBay in 2008, I think many people in the industry probably expected her to gracefully retire, maybe take on a few quiet board seats, perhaps write a memoir. Instead, she embarked on this entirely new and incredibly ambitious chapter, expanding her influence not just within corporate boardrooms, but into the challenging arenas of public service and other high-risk ventures.
Like running for governor.
Exactly. She ran for governor of California in 2010, pouring over $140 million of her own fortune into what became, at the time, the most expensive self-funded political campaign in U.S. history. While she ultimately didn't win that election, it demonstrated her incredible personal drive and her willingness to take on completely new, incredibly daunting public challenges far outside the corporate world.
And then she went back to tech turnarounds.
Yes, later she took on the incredibly challenging, some said impossible, role of CEO at Hewlett-Packard, HP, during a period of significant corporate crisis, attempting to turn around that colossal, struggling tech giant. And then, perhaps most surprisingly, she took the helm at Quibi, that ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful short-form mobile streaming startup, which, despite its eventual outcome, still demonstrated her unwavering willingness to embrace innovation and take substantial risks, even much later in her established career.
And now, diplomacy.
And now, most recently, in 2022, President Biden appointed her as the U.S. ambassador to Kenya, a role that places her squarely in the complex realm of global diplomacy, representing American interests and fostering tech and economic ties in one of Africa's most dynamic and fastest-growing tech hubs. Her power, her influence, it clearly didn't fade away when she left eBay. It simply shifted its form, demonstrating this remarkable capacity for impact across vastly different spheres, from corporate boardrooms to the political battlegrounds of public policy, and now to the intricate world of international relations. It's quite a trajectory.
It really is. So when you look at her entire journey, her legacy isn't just about building one incredibly successful company, is it? It feels more like she led a generation in some ways, fundamentally reshaping our understanding of what effective leadership, particularly in the tech world, can actually look like. She proved pretty conclusively that you don't need to fit into a predefined hole to make a truly monumental impact.
Without a doubt. I think Meg Whitman redefined tech leadership, not by being the loudest voice in the room, certainly not by constantly seeking the media spotlight, but by being the clearest, the calmest, and the most consistently effective leader perhaps of her generation in that space. She demonstrated powerfully that true leadership isn't ultimately about personal brand building or innate charisma. It's about meticulously building robust systems, genuinely empowering people, and executing strategy with unwavering discipline and an unshakable sense of purpose. That, I believe, is a truly rare and often underestimated kind of power. It's a kind that doesn't need to demand or constantly ask for attention. Instead, it just quietly, relentlessly earns profound and lasting respect. Her remarkable career truly illustrates that tangible impact often speaks far, far louder than any personal brand or self-promotion ever could. Okay, so after this really fascinating deep dive into Meg Whitman's remarkable decades steering the ship at eBay, what are the truly timeless, the actionable lessons that we can maybe extract from her story? Because her journey, I think, is much more than just another interesting business case study. It really does provide a kind of practical blueprint for building something that genuinely lasts, for successfully scaling an idea into an empire, and maybe, most importantly, doing all of that without ever feeling like you've had to fatally compromise your core values or, sell your soul in the process.
Yeah, that's the core of it, isn't it? That balance. So for you, the listener, who might be right now in the thick of building a team, maybe launching a company, or perhaps even just nurturing a single new idea today, let's try and distill her decade-long leadership journey down into 5 key actionable lessons that hopefully resonate. Okay, lesson 1. Build the foundation before you even think about building the skyscraper. Whitman fundamentally understood, maybe better than most at the time, that hypergrowth without a rock-solid infrastructure underneath it is just a recipe for disaster, a house of cards waiting to fall. She didn't chase growth at absolutely any cost, which, let's remember, was pretty radical thinking during the peak of the dot-com era's growth above all else mentality.
Very radical.
Her first instinct, her first priority upon arriving, was to immediately shore up what many might consider the boring stuff. The legal department, the HR function, robust financial controls, compliance processes. These are often the unsung heroes, aren't they? They're the essential skeleton that actually makes that thrilling sprint of rapid growth even possible in the first place, preventing burnout, chaos, and collapse down the line. In a startup world that's still often obsessed with sheer speed and scaling immediately, with that mantra of move fast and break things, she deliberately, consciously chose stability and methodical construction first. Her story serves as such a powerful reminder. If you want your company, your project, your core idea to actually last beyond a fleeting hype cycle, if you want it to truly endure the tests of time and competition, you have to prioritize building that robust skeleton first. Without it, the whole structure is almost certainly destined to crumble under its own eventual weight.
Absolutely. It really underscores the importance of foresight over just chasing short-term gratification or vanity metrics. She proved, quite convincingly, that the boring parts are often, in fact, the most vital parts for long-term survival and success.
Right. Okay, lesson 2. Don't just grow, compound. eBay's incredible journey from that tiny $4.7 million startup to an $8 billion global empire wasn't just simple linear growth, it was clearly compounding growth. Each major strategic move she made seemed designed to be a multiplier, not just an addition. The IPO wasn't just about getting a chunk of capital, it was specifically about fueling future deliberate expansion and signaling market legitimacy at a critical time. That global push wasn't just about adding new users in new countries. It was about achieving localized depth, ensuring those users actually stuck around, felt at home, and became long-term contributors to the ecosystem. And the PayPal acquisition, obviously, wasn't just about handling payments. It was about fundamentally locking in user trust, gaining control over a absolutely critical function, and simultaneously creating a powerful new financial engine that could fuel further growth. Each decision felt proactive, carefully layered, deliberately building on the successes of the last to create this exponential leverage over time. It wasn't a chaotic, reactive sprint. It felt like a carefully sequenced, highly calculated
It's a
expansion.
strategic cascade.
Exactly. So the powerful message here for you, the listener, is maybe this. Don't just chase scale purely for scale's sake. Instead, actively chase leverage. Look for those strategic moves, those acquisitions, those features, those partnerships that truly multiply your impact, that create a genuine compounding effect on your efforts and your limited resources, rather than just adding more complexity or more things to manage linearly.
That's a great point, because growth without real leverage can often become unsustainable very quickly, leading to an ever-increasing workload and resource drain without generating proportional returns. Whitman's strategy was clearly about building these powerful, interconnected engines that could largely fuel themselves, constantly reinvesting in the things that strengthen the core platform and its network effects.
Okay, lesson 3. Your culture is your competitive edge. In an era where so many CEOs were scrambling to mimic the perceived success formulas of others, maybe Amazon's relentless efficiency playbook, or the supposed coolness factor associated with certain Silicon Valley norms, Whitman seems stubbornly, almost uniquely focused on preserving what made eBay uniquely eBay. That vibrant, sometimes messy community, its unwavering user-first thinking, and that almost intangible emotional trust that the platform managed to foster between strangers. She famously didn't redesign the slightly clunky website just to impress investors on Wall Street, nor did she seem to over-optimize every single element purely for conversion rates if it meant potentially alienating her loyal existing user base. Her focus, it appears, was consistently on optimizing for human connection, for nurturing that feeling of belonging and mutual trust that her users experienced on the platform. This was perfectly exemplified by her direct, personal engagement with the power sellers, whose candid feedback demonstrably shaped critical product improvements over the years. Because, as she seemed to prove, culture isn't just the pretty decorative frosting you put on the cake at the end. It's the fundamental flour that gives the cake its structure, its substance, its flavor, and ultimately allows it to rise properly. It's the very foundation, often invisible, of what makes a company truly resilient, adaptable, and genuinely beloved by its users, especially when navigating difficult times or intense competition.
It really speaks to internalizing your core values so deeply that they become an intrinsic, non-negotiable part of how the company operates every single day, even under immense pressure. They inform how every significant decision is made, not just what's said in press releases.
Absolutely. Okay, lesson 4. Leadership is not loud. That's clear. Meg Whitman didn't seem to lead through projecting a forceful personality or delivering charismatic, often bombastic speeches like some of her more famous contemporaries. She appeared to lead primarily through fostering absolute clarity throughout the organization.
Clarity, yeah.
This meant having clear, understandable metrics that everyone could track. It meant setting clear goals for every team, large and small, and it meant establishing crystal clear expectations for every individual's role and contribution. She seemed to trust her team implicitly, as we discussed, and she empowered them to act decisively, not by constantly micromanaging their every move, but by meticulously working to remove ambiguity from their path. It was like saying, okay, here's the clear goal, here are the known boundaries or constraints, now go figure out the best way to get there. In a world that often feels completely saturated with loud voices, constant noise, and incredibly short attention spans, that kind of deep clarity is a rare and incredibly precious commodity. But ultimately, it is this clarity, not the surrounding noise, that truly scales effectively. It's what allows thousands of people spread across the globe to move forward in relative unison, empowered by a shared understanding of the direction and the priorities, without requiring constant top-down intervention or hand-holding. Clarity simply reduces friction and dramatically accelerates purposeful execution.
That's so true. Noise just creates confusion and paralysis, doesn't it? Whereas clarity fosters consensus and enables decisive action. Her leadership style really exemplified how a calm, consistent, and clear leader can actually move mountains, perhaps more effectively than a louder one, simply by ensuring everyone knows the destination and trusts the map.
Right. And finally, lesson 5. Real power isn't in how much you control, it's in how well you listen. This is arguably her most profound lesson, I think, and maybe the one that many leaders still struggle with the most today. Whether it was taking the time to fly across the globe to personally meet with top sellers at those power seller conferences, or literally putting on a headset and sitting side by side with the customer service team to take live calls and hear user complaints directly, Whitman seemed to never lose touch with the ground truth, with the reality of the user experience.
Stayed grounded.
She deliberately built these feedback loops right into the very structure and rhythm of the company. This unwavering commitment to actively listening made her more than just a CEO dictating strategy from an ivory tower. It effectively made her a living compass for the entire organization, constantly recalibrating and reorienting based on the real needs and experiences of the people she ultimately served. She consistently remembered who she was building the platform for, the individual users, the small entrepreneurs, the dedicated employees, the global community, and that deep, authentic connection forged an unparalleled level of loyalty and trust over time. It's that deep, active, authentic listening, I think, that truly creates enduring power. It inspires loyalty not just from users, but from employees and even the financial markets themselves, simply because people feel genuinely heard, understood, and valued in the process.
So if we take that final step back now and look at the entirety of Meg Whitman's story during that transformative decade at eBay, it really is a powerful narrative, isn't it? It's a true masterclass in scaling, not just a business, but an idea, a community. She successfully transformed this tiny, somewhat chaotic online auction site into an $8 billion global marketplace powerhouse, employing 15,000 people spread all across the globe. And somehow she achieved all of this without breaking the company, without fatally diluting its essential, quirky soul, and crucially, without losing its fundamental heart, its connection to the users.
Quite a legacy.
It really is. She wasn't the loudest CEO in the room, nor was she the most famous or celebrated at the time. But what she undeniably was, above all else, was profoundly effective and incredibly deliberate in her actions. Her story serves as such a potent reminder, especially in a world that's still often obsessed with hype, disruption for disruption's sake, and overnight success. True greatness isn't always loud or flashy, but it is always deliberate, it is disciplined, and it's deeply connected to a clear sense of purpose. So for you, the listener, if you're out there building something right now, whether it's a small team, an innovative new product, or even just trying to bring a deeply cherished personal dream to life, perhaps the most valuable lesson isn't always about striving to be the biggest disruptor on the block. Maybe, just maybe, the real power, the lasting impact lies in simply being the one who focuses on building things that genuinely work well, serve a real need, and are built to truly last. That's precisely what Meg Whitman did at eBay, and that's exactly why her legacy continues to live on and resonate, far beyond the physical confines of Silicon Valley.
Whether you're leading a burgeoning startup right now, maybe managing a complex team within a much larger organization, or perhaps simply trying to bring one really good idea to life in your own sphere of influence, there's something profoundly universal, I think, in Meg Whitman's story. It's that clear, undeniable reminder that you don't necessarily need to be the loudest voice in the room to lead effectively. It's that powerful insight that you don't necessarily need chaos or breakneck speed to scale successfully and sustainably. And perhaps most importantly, it's that timeless truth, that real power, the kind of power that truly lasts and genuinely makes a difference in the world, comes not from ego or bluster, but ultimately from clarity of vision, unwavering consistency in execution, and genuine care for the people and the purpose you serve.
So, if this deep dive into Meg Whitman's journey and her playbook has given you something truly valuable to reflect on, maybe a strategy to rethink in your own work, perhaps a way to rebuild your team's structure for better scalability, or even just a new standard to reset for yourself as a leader, then I really encourage you to revisit it. Maybe listen again sometime, let those core lessons really sink in. Not just to admire what Meg Whitman managed to build back then, but hopefully to inspire what you can build yourself starting today. And if you happen to know someone else who's currently navigating the often bewildering complexities of leadership, maybe someone who's growing fast but perhaps feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information or the relentless pace of change, then perhaps share this deep dive with them.
Because sometimes, the right story, heard at precisely the right moment, truly can change everything. This isn't just another dry leadership case study to file away and forget. It's a profound reminder for all of us. You don't have to scale your dream like everyone else seems to be doing. You just have to scale it right.